Happy Monday, White Sox fans, and welcome to another edition of Believe in White Sox here on the Believe Podcast Network. It is a Monday. The White Sox are about to start a 3-game series with the Kansas City Royals. They're in the midst of a 9-game homestand, coming off of a 2 out of 3 against the weird-ass Minnesota Twins, as CC Sabathia once famously coined them. We've been away for a little bit, and for those of you that are watching on YouTube and say, oh, wait a minute, this is just a picture, we just do not have the time right now, given my work schedule, to set up the entire lighting setup. And quite frankly, nobody wants to look at a bald guy in glasses anyway. So when we have time to actually set up the video, we'll set up the video. But most people listen on the podcast platforms anyway. The metrics say that. So we're just going to record in a podcast form and hope that if you get the play on YouTube, just know that you don't have to see my ugly mug. But anyways, one of the reasons why I haven't recorded for a little bit, and you're probably wondering, well, Greg, we want more consistent recordings. We want you to actually talk a little bit more about the team. I had, for a moment, lost interest in this team. And the reason why I say that is because up until this series, I didn't know what the purpose of the rest of this year was, because it felt like the development of a lot of the young guys was stagnating, and the starting rotation, and this is really what I want to get to, had more questions than answers. Not just now, in terms of finishing out the year, but in terms of the future, and who might be around for the future, and who, as a young guy, is going to be around for the future. And what I will say is this. The White Sox, in their series against the Braves, showed both sides of the spectrum. They won a game 13-9, had a 10-4 lead the next night, and lost 11-10. That just shows the inexperience of this team to be able to close out games, and then lost 1-0 in the day game. So the White Sox offense can be here, and then it can be gone. On the previous road trip, or rather on the previous homestand into the road trip, from the Tigers series finale through the Royals series, the White Sox scored a grand total of 5 runs. And then in the next 2 games combined, scored 23 runs. And then scored no runs. And then in the series against the Twins, in which they lost the series opener, they scored 7 runs, but allowed 9. And then in the last 2 games of the series, 7 runs and 8 runs. It's an inconsistent offense. And that's what happens when you have young guys. That's what happens when guys are learning on the fly at the big league level. So I guess when I think about, well, what is still interesting about this team, it's trying to find as much success for this young lineup as humanly possible. And I think that you are finding that with the Kyle Teals of the world, with the Colson Montgomerys of the world. And while Colson Montgomery's average isn't high, he homered in all 3 games of the Twins series. He's got 13 on the year. There's a good chance that he ends up as this team's second leading home run hitter behind Lenyn Sosa. Now, he's only hitting .230, but his OPS is .828. He's got a slug of .541. The on-base is only at .288, so that needs to get higher, and that's going to come with time and development. But if you were to tell me at the start of the year that Colson Montgomery would not only be on the big league roster, but would have 13 homers in the span of 150 at-bats, I'd say that's awesome. I'd say that's a good way to start a major league career, even if the average and the on-base aren't exactly where you want it. I think that you're starting to see now that he's gotten into a groove what Kyle Teal can be. The power has showed up a little bit. He's got 4 homers. His average is up to .283. His on-base is at .375. And his slug is at .409. So that's an OPS of .784. But he's showing that he can be what you expected him to be. Edgar Caro is also starting to show the power. His numbers, similar. .285 average, .350 OBP. So the OBP relative to the average not as high. .382 slug, 732 OPS. 4 homers, 34 runs batted in. Pretty good for a rookie. Again, though, there is the challenge of getting him and Teal in the lineup in the same game. Now, Corey Lee is back on the roster. And what that shows me is that Will Venable is willing to experiment a little bit and have Caro and Teal be able to be in the lineup at the same time if one's a DH and have that third catcher. It also means that Brooks Baldwin's going to play more all over because of the fact that you have one less infielder. It also, to me, or rather one less outfielder, I should say. It also, to me, says that the White Sox were more interested in seeing what they have in Corey Lee in the final month and a half of the year in whatever role that he has than continuing to put Josh Rojas out there. And with Josh Rojas gone, that means that we're going to see Montgomery and Meidroth pretty much at short and second every day, which is what I was asking for a couple of weeks ago. It means that we're going to see Curtis Meade play the corners. We're going to see Miguel Vargas play the corners. We're going to see Lenyn Sosa probably slot in at first and also slot in at DH. You're going to see Brooks Baldwin in the outfield. You're going to see less of Andrew Benintendi DHing. And hopefully, you're just going to see less overall Michael A. Taylor because we just don't need to see that. He won't be here next year. Mike Tauchman will, so I'm fine with Mike Tauchman continuing to play. But what I really think the last month has shown is that there's still life in Luis Robert and that the solidification of some of this young core talent on this team, even those that don't have high averages, we've seen every one of these young guys has had success at one point or another. Miguel Vargas' average is starting to tick up again now that he's back and healthy. Chase Meidroth isn't what he was when he first came up, but you know what he is and you know that his potential is still there to be great. And Luis Robert, post-All-Star break, has been fantastic. It's been all that I can have imagined in terms of trying to up his trade value. And you know what? If you get a good deal for him in the offseason, then you trade him, but maybe you feel like if you add the right guys in free agency that you can potentially compete next year. Entering the game, and I'm going to go with the CHSN graphic because they had it, and I don't want to do the research right now. Post-All-Star break, entering the Sunday game, Luis Robert in 28 games hitting at .314 with a .371 on base, a slug of .486, and an OPS of .857. I think that's what White Sox fans have wanted to see from him the entire time. But again, I think that his situation is different than the rest because is there a chance that he sticks around past his 2 club options? And the answer to that is probably not, because you're still a team that's years away from competing, but maybe you feel like if you make a run at the right free agents that you can in some way or another be able to compete. But maybe you also think about what's best for the future of this organization, and maybe you get pieces to fill holes that you otherwise didn't have if you still had Luis Robert. I think it's a very interesting conundrum, and Robert as much said after the game on Sunday that he doesn't know how long he's going to be here, but he's enjoying the guys that he's with. And I think that the moral of the story is you just have to be happy that he's performing in the way that you want him to perform. And now it's going to be up to Chris Getz to decide what his future is. But he's at least, if he finishes the season the way that he's hitting right now over the last month and a half, you at least hope that he's going to have some value on the trade market. So that's the one thing that I think is going to be critical in terms of watching what Luis Robert does over the final month and a half of the season, or a month and a week or whatever the time may be. And you also want to see the White Sox win as many games as possible. And you want to just see the further development of these guys. And granted, I don't think that they're going to finish with, and this is sad to say because I was hoping that it wouldn't be the case, but they're going to lose over 100 games again. But I think that you have to look at certain bits and pieces throughout the year and see, and this Twins series I think is a great example of, this is exactly what you want to see from a team over a 3-game stretch. And I know that this isn't the Minnesota Twins team of recent past. This is a team that gutted themselves. But still, you're seeing this team come together at times and look like a complete baseball team. And I think there's enough pieces here now that will be here next year that you can still rely upon to do that. I make mention of free agency because I do think the White Sox are going to spend a little bit more than they have in years past. And that's because they now have the capital infusion from the Ishbia Group. And you might think, well, Greg, you're repeating yourself over and over and over again with certain things, and I'm trying not to do that. And it's hard not to do that with a team that's so far under 500 as the White Sox are that it's hard to talk about anything else. But there is one big issue that concerns me, and that's the fact that your opening day starter was Sean Burke, the guy that started the second game of the season. Your number 1 and number 2 starters to begin the year were Sean Burke and Jonathan Cannon. Both of them have been optioned to AAA. We had made mention of Cannon a few weeks ago, and Burke was optioned just about a week and a half ago. And Sean Burke, his command just is too inconsistent. It's just too inconsistent to be relied upon. And I don't know at this point, when you look at what the White Sox are, a team that's not competing this year, if you have to send those two guys down, what it means is that either A, you're trying to work on something to then bring them back up because you hope that they can continue to contribute at the major league level, or 2, you're not sure what their future is. And I'm not saying that they're put out to pasture by being sent down to AAA one time. That's a complete overreaction. But what I'm saying is that there has to be some concern when, realistically speaking, of the current 5-man rotation of Aaron Civale, Davis Martin, Martin Perez, who I think the White Sox will bring back, Shane Smith and Yoendrys Gomez, the only 2 guys that you can see as a part of the distant future are Smith and Martin. Now, everybody is going to want to see Noah Schultz at some point. Drew Thorpe will probably get another chance in the rotation once he's fully recovered from Tommy John surgery. I would say the same with Kai Busch, considering he's a lefty. But I would tend to think that the White Sox are actually going to spend money on starting pitching in free agency. And it might not be starting pitching that is around for the long term, but I think it's starting pitching that may make a short-term impact and be exactly what an Aaron Civale could end up being if you bring him back on like a 2-year deal, and that's a bridge to hold the rotation together for somebody that's going to be part of it longer than the next 2 years. And I don't think that it's going to cost a lot of money to bring Aaron Civale back, assuming he wants to stay here. And I think Martin Perez could even sign for less than what the White Sox signed him for this year, considering he was hurt a majority of the year, and I didn't even think that he was going to come back this year. But I think that the opportunities given to seize future rotation spots for Jonathan Cannon and Sean Burke, and they received every opportunity. Those guys received every single opportunity this year to keep themselves in the rotation for at least the near future. And both of them are back in the minor leagues. To me, that shows that this organization is unsold on what their ideal future rotation is going to look like. And if the Hagen Smiths and the Noah Schultzes of the world aren't ready, and they're not sure if they want Grant Taylor to be a starter, then I think that it's going to be worth spending some money in free agency on some cost-effective starting pitching that could help bridge the gap to the future. And maybe if this core has an acceleration in their development over the next 6 months, early into next year, then maybe you feel like you can even compete for a playoff spot in 2026. I don't think that is anywhere in the logical possibilities of where the 2026 White Sox are going to be at, but I do think it's worth spending money on starting pitching. Bullpen help, I don't think it's worth spending the kind of money for a team that I don't know is going to compete. This bullpen has been fine, but it hasn't been ideal. Jordan Leisure shouldn't be your closer. And I know that I'm the guy that bashes Jordan Leisure, but that guy should not be your closer. Now, maybe the White Sox think that Mike Vassell could end up slotting in as a starter at some point. I'm not so sure that he's better off just continuing to work in the role that he's in. I think this bullpen could be completely overworked, and I really don't know, other than Brandon Eisert, Jordan Leisure, and Grant Taylor, who's actually going to be back next year. That, and Wickelman Gonzalez. I keep forgetting about Wickelman Gonzalez now that he's up. So I would say that he's definitely going to be locked to be in the bullpen next year. Who knows? There's a lot that is going to be determined about the 2026 White Sox in the offseason from the pitching standpoint. But what I can tell you is that the White Sox do need to make some pitching adjustments. Because, and I will make this declaration right here and right now, and if I'm wrong 2 years from now, I'd like somebody to call me out on it. I'm not going to make any sort of stupid promises about eating newspaper or whatever dumb bets people end up doing on these. But the next time that the White Sox make the playoffs, neither Jonathan Cannon nor Sean Burke will be a part of that starting rotation. I think that they are at best guys that will fill out the rotation until you find your ideal rotation. And maybe I end up being wrong. Maybe something clicks with them like it did many years ago for Lucas Giolito, from becoming one of the highest qualified ERA guys in 2018 to becoming the number one or number two starter, depending upon how you want to classify it, of a very competitive White Sox team. Maybe that happens, maybe it doesn't for Burke and Cannon. I think that Cannon overall has better stuff and has the potential to end up being a 4 or 5 starter with good stuff, but his command is too inconsistent. And that's the reason why he's not on the Major League roster. The same can be said for Sean Burke. I mean, there's too many starts where Sean Burke has issued 3+ walks. 54 walks in 117 and 2/3 innings. That's a little over 4 walks per 9 innings. That's unacceptable for a Major League starter. You cannot have that. You just cannot have that poor command and expect to stay in a big league rotation. You want to see what Jonathan Cannon's is? 35 walks in 96 innings. That's actually better. It's 3.3, but it's still not good. You should not have walks per 9 inning numbers as a starter over 3. Just can't do it. I know Burke's strikeout numbers are high, but you just cannot have that many walks per 9, and that's what makes me question whether or not he's going to be in this rotation in the future. And there's a lot of opportunity for development, but you look at him historically as he's come up through the minors, and there's nothing to suggest that that number is going to improve. You look at his walks per nine back in college, like when he was at Maryland in 2021, he had a 5.1 walks per nine. I mean, last year, or rather 2 years ago at AAA Charlotte, he was averaging 6.6 walks per nine. Granted, that was only 9 starts. Last year, in 64 innings at AAA, 5.0 walks per 9 innings. In fact, this has probably been the lowest walks per 9 that he's, well, actually at the big league level last year in a small sample size, he only had 3.3, but the fact that he was at the big league level last year just goes to show you how poor the 2024 White Sox were. My point being is that command has to be better if you want to be a part of the rotation for the future. And that's not absolving guys like Davis Martin, who has struggled with the home run ball, and Shane Smith, who has been inconsistent at times. But Smith and Martin have been much better than Burke and Cannon. And those are all 4 guys that were in the rotation to start the year. So I think you need to bring in outside help. I think, damn the torpedoes, you can't strictly rely on your own system, but you have to be smart about it. You have to be smart about the type of guy that you bring in. I was actually thinking, based upon the fact that he was pitching against the Cubs over the weekend, why not bring Kyle Hendricks in? Kyle Hendricks is 35 years old, and while he's not the same guy that he once was, he's only making $2.5 million this year with the Angels. Now, he's from California, and so he probably wouldn't mind staying in California to continue his career. But I'd have no opposition to taking a flyer on Kyle Hendricks. You know he's going to eat innings. I mean, Kyle Hendricks, you can pencil him in at minimum 130 innings, which, for what you expect from next year's White Sox, I'll take that. And he'll keep you in games. I got no problem with taking a flyer on somebody like Kyle Hendricks. Who knows, maybe Justin Verlander wants to keep pitching. Now, I don't think that you sign 43-year-old Justin Verlander. Now, the Giants were expecting to compete. And the fact that Verlander is 1-10 is not ideal. But his ERA is at 4.64. He's pitched 110 innings, 22 starts. So at least he's consistent. Much better than he was last year with the Astros. My point being is that you have to bring in at least 2 veteran starters. At least 2. Because I think it's worth spending minimal money, not going over the moon, but spending some money to solidify this starting rotation. And maybe Jonathan Cannon and Sean Burke are bullpen guys. Maybe they work themselves into the bullpen, and at some point, they're ready to become starters again. Or maybe they're just not meant for the starting rotation. I would rather see Jonathan Cannon, given his stuff, redeveloped into a high-leverage reliever. If the command can get better, you max him out, be a 1-inning max guy, like a 7th or an 8th-inning guy. I think that has the potential to be a very dangerous proposition for the future White Sox bullpen. Whatever the future White Sox bullpen is. That I don't know. But what I'm saying is that if I look at the groups that need improvement, obviously the outfield. But I just don't think that you're getting rid of Andrew Benintendi anytime soon. Mike Tauchman's here for at least another year. And you got to decide what you do with Luis Robert. I think the bullpen is up in the air. I think your infield and your catching situation are pretty much set. The first baseman and the third baseman, TBD, but I think that those pieces are in your organization. I think they'll give Tim Elko another chance. And if not, I think that you've got three viable guys in Miguel Vargas, Lenyn Sosa, and Curtis Mead who all could play first base. But again, we'll see. A lot can be determined, but I think that if this team hits as well as it has at times in August, they need the type of starting pitching consistency and experience to make sure that in a game where they score 7 runs, they aren't giving up 9. That's it, and that's all for this edition of Believe in White Sox. We'll be back at some point toward the end of the week. The Royals are in town, who somehow are back in the wild card race. Didn't see that coming. And then the New York Yankees come to town for their only visit to Rate Field Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. All right, everybody. Thanks for listening. Take care, and go White Sox.